We continue our breakdown of the Dobber Prospect scouting team's midseason rankings with a segment called Scouts Favorites. We'll discuss our scouts' favorite prospects on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Teddy Stiga, joined by Sebastian. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down our Dobber Prospect scouting team's rankings for the midseason and discussing each of our scouts' favorites. I'm the director of North American Scouting. Sebastian is the head scout and head of European Scouting at Dobber Prospects. And we've got a bunch of people working, beside us in order to help us cover the 2024 NHL draft. Each of them cover a specific region, so we'll go through each person's preferences for prospects and break down why they like them and how they pushed for them in the rankings and where they ended up. We'll start off with Luke, Jordan, Annie, and Graham, respectively our WHL scout, our OHL scout, our Finland and Central Europe scout, and our Russian scout. In the second segment, we'll cover David, Colin, and Sasha. David is our USA scout. Colin is our goaltender scout, and Sasha is our QMJHL scout. And in the final segment, Sebastian and I will give you our favorites and the players that we pushed for this midseason ranking. So before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So I think we start things off with Luke's favorite for the player we've chosen as his favorite among the multiple that he pushed for. He was among the guys who were pushing really, really hard for Berkeley Catton at 3, but the real standout with Luke is Tij Iginla at 17, right?
For sure. Like Luke is a massive fan of Tij Iginla, and that is stretching back to our first meeting of the season back in November. Tij is a player that Luke has just adored in terms of the combination of off puck movement, intelligence in the offensive zone, and clinical goal scoring ability, especially when he's been able to do so away from Andrew Crystal. And Crystal's been injured a little bit this season, which has given it a little bit of space for Tij to really shine on his own in a solo context there in Kelowna.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tij is he's an average sized player who plays well above his side. He's a player who's constantly going into the boards, leading the forecheck, making plays offensively. He's extremely aware as well, like a really intelligent, processor of the game, who has the goal scoring touch, who has decent playmaking. But the main issue with Iginla is that you're not really getting much defensively out of him. And if you can get his defensive game up to par, I think you can get a really, really good NHLer out of him. But obviously the bloodline helps. Having a father who's a Hall of Famer in Jerome Iginla, like it'll help you. But yeah, he ended up 17th on our board, and Luke was a big reason for that. He was pushing for him hard, and with more viewings after after our midseason rankings came out, I'm getting a lot more comfortable with that. I think even Tij could cut my top 15 potentially. But moving on to Jordan Harris is our OHL scout. He does some fantastic work for us, and I think the main guy that he's been pushing for since the start of the year is Beckett Sennecke. He's a player who's grown 6 inches in the past year, and it really shows when you watch him on the ice. He's really uncoordinated. His feet and his hands aren't on the same page yet, but we all think that he can get there. And Sennecke is extremely skillful. And what I've really liked about Sennecke is at the start of the year, he was incredibly chaotic. Like, this is a player who was just trying to make everything happen and was just trying to dangle through players and just had a lot of chaos in his game. And he's toned that down. And it's, toning that down has brought up the background of defensive ability, of intensity, of motor in his game that's really been present since he started to kind of for lack of a better word, calm down. You know what I mean? So like it's gone a lot more projectable as the season has gone on. And yeah, he's for me, he's among the best defensive players in this draft when you isolate his ability to identify checks, to back check hard, to put his stick in the right lanes and kind of anticipate play in the defensive zone. He's incredibly smart too. So he ended up at 20 on our board, and this is more than reasonable for me. Like this is a good place for him. And honorable mention to Zayne Parekh at 5th overall. I think all of us were on the same page regarding how good Zayne Parekh is. But Jordan's been on that boat since the start of the year and has been pushing hard for Parekh. Like I think he's his biggest fan amongst us. So yeah, and he was on for our prospect spotlight on Zayne Parekh. And yeah, he broke that down wonderfully. Um, Moving on to Annie. Annie Karvinen is our Finland and Central Europe scout. She covers the Finnish prospects in Liga and also some of the Central European leagues like the Swiss National League, the Czech League, that kind of stuff. And she has been the biggest fan of Konsta Helenius since the start of the year, and nothing's changed on that end. So give me the breakdown on why Annie likes Konsta Helenius so much.
For sure. Like with Helenius, it is the brain that really ticks the entire operation, and
Yep.
Annie is a very big appreciator of high IQ players who are ahead of the play mentally. And Helenius is that against professional competition in Liga, and it's why his production has been so impressive this season. He's like nearing 35 points in less than 45 games so far this season in Liga. I have to double check the exact stat line at the moment, but it's right around there. And he's done that despite really lacking any like super elite overall offensive tools, just because he is constantly in the right place at the right time. He knows which pass to make in which situation. And he's very, very calculated, and he's a very quick learner. And with that has come a pretty quick progression this season where when he makes mistakes, he incorporates them and learns from them very, very actively. And he's been a solid piece in our top 10 all season long as a result. But Annie has certainly been highlighting the intelligence and the way he thinks the game, the way he approaches the game in general, as central to his value. And we agree. Like we see high end like second line upside with Konsta Helenius, and also a floor that is right around that of like an average second line center. We think that you're getting a really like a guaranteed second line piece in Helenius with limited chances of him being a first liner or like a bottom six piece on either side of that projection. But yeah, it's the intelligence that makes that projection so comfortable for us and for Annie specifically.
For sure. The main thing with me for Hellenius is that, even though the tools right now aren't there, I feel like he's so intelligent that there's a non-zero chance that he develops those tools into something
Yeah.
great. And Konsta Helenius with even marginally better playmaking or goal scoring ability would be terrifying.
Oh
Like
yeah.
this player just I think for me he's easily top 2, top 3 smartest players in this draft. And it's with players like this, there's a huge asterisk of like, even though the tools aren't there, you can't you can't count out smarts. It's something that's so coveted in the NHL, and for good reason. Like players who understand the game at a high level already, that usually either only gets better or just uplifts their toolkit as they go on. But to close off the first segment, Grant Montgomery, our Russian scout, is a pretty big fan of Anton Silayev, and a big reason why he ended up at 12th overall on our board. Silayev has been really polarizing, and you might hear Silayev at 12, and we're talking about a 6'7", 200-pound defenseman who skates like the wind and is playing top 4 KHL minutes at 18 years old, and you're thinking, wow, that's low. It could have been lower if not for Graham, and a bit yourself as well, right?
I like Salayev's upside a ton. Like 12 was the floor of where I think I personally would have let him fall to. Like my range for Salayev has been 8 to 12 quite consistently for the last like 2 or 3 months. And he's a player that has astronomical upside because of those otherworldly tools. Like he's 6'7", he's absolutely massive, really strong, the strongest lower body that I've seen in a draft eligible prospect in ages. And the way he gets around the ice is unicorn like. We don't use that word very often on this show, but his mobility combined with his strength allows him to get around the ice and to close gaps with unbelievable aggression and quickness, and just a really, really great skater. At his best, he's a tremendous shutdown defenseman against the rush and the cycle. with the puck on a stick, he certainly has his moments that shine a little bit, but it's certainly marred with inconsistency. And I think we're going to be able to really delve into the intricacies of Silayev's game in Monday's episode, where we're going to dedicate the entire episode on the prospect spotlight on Silayev. And I think on like Tuesday, you're going to see an episode where I hop on Locked On Sharks with JD Young, also breaking down Silayev. So if you're looking for Silayev content, there's lots coming down the way, but he's a fascinating prospect, and I think Graham and I were certainly in agreement that 12 was the floor with him.
Absolutely, I'm on that page. But that wraps it up for that first segment. Now we're gonna get into some more of our scouts' favorites in our second segment. Break down players like Teddy Stiga, Carter George, Raoul Boilard. It's gonna be a fun one. Stick around. We'll talk about it right after these messages from our sponsors at FanDuel.
Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and far more. I know I personally am always a very big fan of live same game parlays, especially when I'm attending an event live. It just makes the action all the more exciting to be able to make a couple of predictions and see if they turn out right. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Alrighty, so moving on to our USA Scout, our goaltender scout, and our QMJHL Scouts favorites for the 2024 NHL Drafts midseason breakdown. We'll talk about the players that these three guys pushed for really hard. We'll start with David Sod, our USA Scout. He's new this year, and he's been covering a lot of the NTDP, of the USHL, and the NCAA. That's mainly been his responsibility, and he's been a pretty big fan of Teddy Stiga from the jump. And I can see why. I mean, Teddy Stiga is a really, really good playmaker. I think that's the main standout with him, along with the speed, along with the dynamic playmaking and stick handling tools. So ended up at 40th overall on our board, and I can only see him climbing from here. I'd be really, really surprised if he drops. He's been really impressive, and when he's been playing with the likes of Kamil Bednarik and Cole Eiserman, I mean, he's been the more consistent of those three for me so far. And with Stiga, I mean, a lot of the plays that Cole Eiserman finished, a lot of the situations where Cole Eiserman ended up alone in the slot were mainly because of how good Teddy Stiga is at drawing in pressure, opening up space, making pass through lanes, and accessing the middle, maybe not himself, but just pushing the puck to the middle at all costs. So that's been a big, big part of his game. And David and I are pretty big fans of his. So ending up at 40 is more than reasonable. And like I said, he's only going to climb from here. And another main one for David was John Mustard at 31st overall. So Stiga's playing in the NTDP right now for the National Team Development Program. John Mustard's playing for the Waterloo Blackhawks. A team that isn't necessarily stacked, that isn't necessarily the most, I would say, competitive, especially if you compare it with the NTDP, if you compare it with the Chicago Steel, that kind of stuff. But John Mustard's been a big reason of why that team's been succeeding relatively well. And him ending up at 31st, for me, is more than reasonable. I'm a big fan of his. I love the dynamic ability to just push pucks up the ice. His crossover usage and transition is really good. His curl and drag wrist shot is ridiculously good as well. But he's also shown some flashes of playmaking, of stick handling, and a lot of individual tools that could come together and make a really, really good power game. So, any team that drafts John Mustard is going to be really happy with this. And I mean, we're talking like he's making the all team name of the 2024 draft, right? Like, it's him and a couple guys in there, but John Mustard's up there in terms of top names in the 2024 draft, and he's good. Like, he's really, really good. But moving on to Colin Hunter, our goaltender scout, and he's been a pretty big fan of Carter George since the start. I've always preferred Ryerson Leenders, and it led to a decent debate. On when the meeting came, I knew already heading into this that it would be a debate for Carter George versus Ryerson Leenders. He ended up being back to back, but Colin was a big reason why Carter George came out on top. But yeah, do you remember that? Do you remember that debate? It was an interesting one, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I was there and I edited the video. Like I have all the insight of that debate. Yeah, it was an interesting one because it had a lot to do with like also stylistic preferences
Yeah,
between the two. Like Carter George is the bigger, more traditional goaltender between the two, which makes the projection a little bit more straightforward. And especially for a goaltending scout like Colin, makes it a lot more of a known quantity, perhaps. And of course, George has some other aspects in his game that are less conventional, such as his aggression in playing pucks and leaving his net. But he's very good at it, so it's quite fun. And Leenders is more of like the undersized goaltender, like in the mold stylistically, perhaps a bit more comparable to players like Devin Levi and Dustin Wolf. Obviously projection there is very different, at least at this stage. But as an undersized goaltender who is intelligent and athletic, and yeah, I've watched a little bit of both. I've liked both in different viewings. I think both have also had viewings of that were a bit rougher around the
yeah.
edges. And I didn't really have too much input here, but it was very entertaining to see you two go at it because you both felt quite strongly for your respective positions.
For sure, yeah, and what I love about Leanders is just how aware he is in that. Like, I said this in the scouting meet, but you're never beating him from the point. He tracks pucks so well. He keeps tipping options in mind when making his saves. Like he'll sit back when he sees that there's a tip option in front of him, just to be able to kind of predict where the puck's going. And his ability to redirect pucks consistently into corners, consistently into his teammates' pass for them to pick it up and break out is just, it's so projectable. It's so interesting. But Carter George has a lot more athletic ability, that's for sure. He's a lot more daring with the puck. He's trying a lot more things. So I could see why the projection with George could outpace Leanders, but smarts and goaltenders is just such a big thing for me. And Leanders has that in spades. But moving on to the QMJHL. Um, Maxime Massé has been the favorite out of the QMJHL for the longest time. But our QMJHL scout Sacha Lagarde has been a huge fan of Raoul Boilard, and so have I. And we ended up ranking Raoul Boilard a good 14 spots, 15 spots ahead of Maxime Massé because of how good Raoul Boilard is in all three zones. He's a face-off wizard. He's really, really strong on pucks. He's able to make plays in transition really well. He's incredibly smart. The baseline of his game, I'd say, is a lot more projectable than Marseille's. Marseille is a really good playmaker, but he doesn't scan enough to support that playmaking role. But it just feels like Marseille has a sixth sense for where his teammates are. He doesn't really need to scan all that well, but when it comes to recovering pucks and going the right way off the boards, the scanning becomes a big issue. The defensive game's still a work in progress, but it has taken some strides. But overall, there's just a lot more to like with Raoul Boilard. And Sacha and I have been really big fans of Boilard since the start. Boilard is less, well, both of them are pretty decently sized. I think Boilard is 6'2", 190, and Marseille's, what, 6'2", 195, something like that. They're pretty similarly sized, but Boilard has a bit less physicality to his game, a lot less power, I'd say, to his game. Um, but both are really likable prospects, and this is another debate that, like, when Marseille ended up at 52, I was like, even then, like, even if I don't really like him, it's still very, very low. There's a lot of players that we could have ranked higher, but there were just so many guys we needed to plug in, so many guys we needed to discuss that, some players fell, right? Did you get that same feeling?
For sure. I mean, it was our first top 64 ranking of the season, which certainly made it a bit more chaotic in that a lot of us had a player that we just had as like a second round range, and we just
Yeah.
started bringing up players that we wanted to slot in as like the rankings kept developing, which as the draft cycle continues, as we get into making top 100 and top 128 rankings, leading up to draft day, I think we're going to see a lot more like real tiers developing in that second round. Whereas in this meeting, it was a lot more stylistic preferences and overall trajectories in terms of development that were determining where players fell in that second round range for us. But as we get more viewings, we'll get real tiers developing there, and we'll see where Marseille falls there. Like maybe he becomes like a mid-second tier player, or maybe the skepticism continues and he becomes a late second rounder.
Yeah, for sure. Looking forward to see how that develops as the year goes on. But that wraps things up for our second segment. We'll get into our third, where we discuss Sebastian and I's favorites to close things off. I've got three OHL guys. You've got a Swedish league guy, a Czech Czech prospect, and a USHL prospect as your three favorites. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors over at Game Time. If you're looking for cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to get them done. Game Time is a great source for these tickets, especially if you have a schedule that changes a lot, like mine. I can find myself with an afternoon free out of nowhere, and Game Time's a great way to spice up those evenings when I've got an afternoon free. You can get tickets up to the last minute before an event, and sometimes an hour after they start. And it's not just for sports; it's for anything that requires tickets. So theater, comedy, sports, obviously anything that needs a ticket, Game Time has you covered. They're obsessed with saving you money as well. They've got a bunch of deals to help you save on your tickets, and the Game Time guarantee makes sure that you always get the best price for your tickets. If you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what Game Time has to offer, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. That's code Locked On for $20 off at checkout. Checking them out. Alrighty, so closing things off with our final segment here, discussing Sebastian and I's favorites, the players that we pushed for on the day of the meeting. And I've got three OHL guys, and I'm looking forward to breaking down. We'll go one by one, just to make it a bit easier. I'll start off with mine. He's the highest of the bunch that we've discussed, and it's Liam Greentree at 13th overall. Greentree, I've been a big fan of since about November. I started off the year kind of seeing him as more of a straight line goal scoring power forward ish type of player, but a player who plays really linearly. And I didn't really see as much intelligence in his game early on. But as he got comfortable dishing the puck, as he got comfortable kind of, assuming the role of a playmaker, he just completely came out of his shell. And before you know it, the playmaking game was just unfurling in front of you, and you could see not just good hockey sense, but hockey sense in spades. Like this kid went from being an average thinker of the game, in my opinion, to one of the best thinkers in the game in this draft. He constantly pushes the middle. He's constantly playing give and goes into areas. He can kind of draw players into him and open up space for his teammates. And when given the opportunity, he can just grip it and rip it. Like he's got that goal scoring ability. It's absurd. So yeah, I've just been a massive fan of how his game's developed over the year. And fun fact, he's the only draft eligible from any of the CHL leagues apart from Tanner Howe wearing a C on his jersey this season. So it's high praise. It's him and Tanner Howe. And Tanner Howe, it's mainly just by default. Like there's no one else on that team that has any real experience. So it's him or nothing really. Whereas Greentree has some options on his team, and the fact that he always leads by examples and the things I've heard about him off the ice have just been rock solid. Like this is a born leader. This is a player who really drives his team forward when he needs to and can take a game by the horns, both with his goal scoring, his processing, his handling, and his playmaking ability. The only weakness with Greentree is that he's not the best skater. Like he's not necessarily agile or mobile, but he's still getting to the right spots just because he thinks the game so well. And for a guy that's 6'2", 185, like you can live with less good skating, especially if he's constantly getting to the right spots, right?
For sure. I mean, like Greentree is just this high IQ player who also just works his butt off in every single shift. And he has a really thorough understanding of how to support play, both on
Yeah.
puck and off puck. He's not the style of player that's going to try to do everything on his own. He's always using his line mates with him. And it's also part of what makes him such a great captain at such a young age in the OHL is that he's always team oriented. And that includes doing some of the dirty work in the offensive zone and doing some of the stuff that are perhaps a bit less fun to do overtly, but he seemingly loves it. Like he finds a ton of joy in the violence and in the physicality and in the grit down low. And he's certainly a player that has stood out in all of our viewings. And in
Yeah.
our teen range, I don't know if there's a single player that had more popular support, like unanimously from our entire draft team than Liam Greentree.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings us to 18th overall, the player that I think you push for harder than anyone else on meeting day, Alfons Freij, left-handed defenseman out of Sweden. You're a big fan of his game. Talk me through what made him such a bona fide top 20 pick for you.
Yeah, like that was kind of the distinction. I know that like you had him in that 20 to 25 range, and I was banging the table to have him in the top 20, and got a little bit of support from David Sod as well on that front. But Freij has been by a large margin the best Swedish prospect in this draft class in my eyes. Just thoroughly dynamic with the puck on his stick, really intelligent, constantly switching lanes as a puck carrier, really good breakout passer, does a lot with the puck on his stick at the J20 level, but also has a level of intelligence of when he is being overwhelmed with pressure, he will not keep barreling and doing it on his own. He will just give up the puck to a teammate to retain possession. And that is something that I think is quite key for his projectability, because one of the reasons that there might be a bit more skepticism with having him this high is that he's yet to play a single professional game this season or in his career, I think. And we're really working off of the sample in J20. That said, he has shown a level of maturity and intelligence and like high-end skating ability as well in all three zones, where he closes gaps aggressively. He is a pretty solid in-zone defender on the cycle. Transition defending is helped a lot by his ability to match the footwork of Russian wingers, and offensively, he is just the best playmaking defenseman in Europe in this draft season.
Yeah,
Constantly activating, looking to poke holes into defensive structures, always just very proactive and trying to make a difference.
yeah,
And I think that his ceiling is one of the higher ones among players that we have ranked outside the top 10. It
yeah.
just remains quite theoretical as a projection as of right now, because we have only seen him absolutely dominate junior competition, and getting some professional viewings in there would really help us try to like entrench this position where we have him at the moment. But I have yet to seen anything from Alfons Freij in my viewings to argue him outside the top 20. I've loved
Yeah.
everything I've seen, but we will see how the draft cycle continues. But the upside's just awesome with him.
Absolutely. And we have four players left to close things off. I'll go with my two other prospects that I've named as my favorite and push the table for. Jet Lachenko at 53. This is a player that, during the meeting we kind of forgot about. But once I brought him up, I had to slot him in as high as I could. We ended up slotting him in at 53, right in between Maxim Massé and Adam Yeko. And Luchenko's been really solid in the OHL this year. This is a player who thinks the game at an advanced level, and for an August birthday, I think has a really close NHL future. It's
Yeah.
very rare to see, but like everything about Luchenko's game is just so projectable. He works extremely hard off the puck. He thinks the game at an advanced level. He's another player whose tools aren't necessarily up to the level of other prospects in his class, but overall, just such a mature foundation to his game. I think that the floor and the ceiling is probably a third liner. But a really good one. And there's a small chance he makes it out of that projection and into kind of a middle six type of player, but it really depends on the tools progressing and kind of seeing him improve his goal scoring ability, improve his playmaking ability. But like, there's so much to love there. And the other player that I have as a player that I really push for, I needed him in my top 64, and I made that clear. Sam O'Reilly out of the London Knights, one of the most intelligent players in this class, and to sum him up, I would call him just a slower Owen Beck. Really aware, really smart, really defensively responsible. Maybe not as good of a playmaker and overall kind of toolsy player, but he's so smart and so good at positioning himself in the right spots and hitting the right pockets at the right times that you barely notice his lack of skating. Who are the last two players that you had on your end that you really push for?
Yeah, I mean, one of them was a player that I didn't think anyone else was going to bring up in like tangible second round conversation, and that's Ondrej Koch.
Yeah,
He's a player that I've liked in every viewing I've had so far of him this season. He's quite toolsy, very raw still, especially physically. Like he's 6'2", but like under 160 pounds still.
yeah,
But he's really solid defensively, really intelligent in his positioning, in the way that he applies pressure, especially on the back check. Like he's a real pickpocketer, and he can launch counterattacks really well, and not in like an overly dynamic way, but he's very much a possession based winger. He will try to get the puck to the offensive zone. He will then delay, wait for his teammates to get there, and then get the puck onto the stick of a teammate that can really create stuff in the offensive zone. And there have been flashes of interesting playmaking skill with Kosh, but when it's not flashing, it's non-existent. So that remains a big question mark for us. So the offensive projection is uncertain, but we see enough, or at least I personally see enough upside as a defensive player and in transition for him to be a decent bottom six projection. And I think that he has the tools to really be able to ramp up that projection with time.
Yeah. And
And
the other player would be?
the other one would be another very intelligent player that I also really wanted to get slotted into our top 64, just as you did with Sam O'Reilly, and that is Luke Osburn, who is far from the best player that we could have put in at 63rd overall as he currently is. The tool still has some question marks, certainly, but he is unbelievably intelligent. He consistently makes the best decision possible to him, not just a good one. Delays when he has the puck on his stick, very comfortable when he's under pressure, always has a pass in his back pocket, but he's looking for higher end plays to make. And he's one of the youngest players in this draft class, and that's a combination that I'm always a very big fan of. And at the very least, I thought it was enough to barely crack our top 64.
For sure. He's a left-handed defenseman, if I remember
Yes.
correctly. It's been a while since I've watched him.
He's a lefty playing in the USHL with a team that I currently forget.
Youngstown, I think, right?
Youngstown,
Founders?
yes.
Yep.
I believe so.
Absolutely. I have more questions in the viewings that I've seen. I haven't been the most sold on him, but I'll give him I'll give him the benefit of the doubt so far. You and David were big fans of his. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episodes as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of March. This has been Hattie Calicash with Sebastian Tij. We hope you have a great weekend, and we hope to see you next time.